Good evening and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Poldy. I'm the presbyter here, and it's my pleasure to host you and welcome you this evening. I'm going to hand you over to Rob Mitchell to introduce our guest speaker for this evening.
Thank you, David, and yes, a very warm welcome, and I mean warm on this particular night. And it's my pleasure and indeed privilege to extend especially a warm welcome to our distinguished guest tonight, Dr. Royden Somervile, and to his wife Lee here, and to his gathered family from Knox. And I can report that Royden and my paths have crossed on a number of occasions. Back in the early 60s, Royden and I were at Waitaki Boys High School together. I think that's right, isn't it? And then in the late 60s, I was back here in Dunedin at Knox Church and Knox College, and again some connections through Knox Youth Fellowship and Knox Church and the university, of course. Royden completed his degree in the early 70s, I think it was, 71. And then in 2005 we came back from Australia to Knox, and again our paths crossed. So I've really enjoyed occasions, and coffee is always a good conversation starter. Not that it takes too much to get conversation going with Royden. And of course Royden has served as a member of the University of Otago Council since 2010. He was Pro-Chancellor in 2017 and Chancellor from 2018 to 2024. I hope I've got the 22. Right. And he follows, of course, in his great-great-great-grandfather's footsteps as Chancellor. That was, of course, the Reverend Dr. Thomas Burns. So there's an interesting piece of information. So on this third series of a series of 5 talks in this Gibson series, Royden is going to, I believe, talk on some contemporary issues, existential risk and intergenerational justice. I think that's a topic that probably will allow him to roam in a specific way for him. And there's been a subheading floating around: do we have moral responsibility to future generations in light of, for example, the risks of using artificial intelligence? And I'm sure that's a topic that's of some interest to a lot of people, and should be too. And I want to pick up on, there's certainly a lot of information I could share about the various activities that Royden's been involved in, but I won't go through them all, like the social services here in Dunedin, the Burns Association, I believe. But I just want to pick up on one image for tonight. Royden apparently, I believe, is a good bridge player. No? Not good. Somebody else, not in the bridge department. No. I wonder where I picked that up from. Can I use the image though? The image that I was thinking of was the topic that Royden could explore tonight would be that we live on an island of issues, and I'm hoping that he'll take us on a bridge of possibilities to a land of promise. So that was where I was going to use the bridge, but somehow I've got the wrong notion. But let's use that image. So extend now a welcome to Royden.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for your generous introduction. It is a privilege to participate in this series in memory of Emeritus Professor Colin Gibson. Colin lectured me in English in 1966 and 1967. He had more of a significant influence on the studies of my wife, Lee, who completed an MA in English in 1969. Thank you to the Committee of Four for your kind invitation to engage in what the German philosopher and sociologist Jürgen Habermas referred to as ethical discourse. Being present here in this church reminds me of my mother's family's links with the rich Wesleyan tradition. My great-grandfather and his siblings were baptised by Charles Creed, the subject of Donald Phillips' current scholarship. I'm also reminded of my family's involvement in the establishment of the little church named Hone Weteri, located in Taumutu on the shores of Lake Ellesmere, Te Waihora. However, before I get too misty-eyed, I need to press on. Tonight my topic is existential risks and intergenerational justice. The instantiation of an existential risk or existential catastrophe is outright human extinction or destruction of humanity's long-term potential. Intergenerational justice involves a moral obligation to act fairly and not to burden future generations with harmful and irreversible consequences from our acts and omissions. The 21st century is characterised by uncertainty, complexity and constant change. It is a time when we need to become philosophers and to dare to be wise. It is also a time for inspired public theology. My talk will traverse law and policy approaches for managing existential risks. I will focus on the complex challenges of artificial intelligence and how we can engage with and respond to this significant issue. Then, after wallowing in despair, I will consider what I believe engenders hope for the future. When discussing intergenerational issues, it is not possible to predict what will occur in an unknown future. As St. Paul said of the unknown, we see through a glass darkly. We are naturally fearful when addressing the unknown. Robert Burns, in his poem To a Mouse, on turning her up in her nest with the plough, insightfully wrote, "Still thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee. But I backward cast my ear, on prospects drear. And forward I canna see, I guess and fear." I first became aware of existential risks in 1962 at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a fourth former at boarding school. I still recall my anxiety about whether I'd see my family again, while my classmates were more excited about the brinkmanship involved and, to use common parlance, were urging the participants to bring it on. I was reminded of my reaction in 1962 more recently, when our daughter banned our young granddaughter from watching podcasts on YouTube about the horrifying impacts of climate change because of her high level of anxiety. In the academy, there has been an upsurge in scholarship involving environmental psychology, addressing how to treat young people experiencing apocalyptic thoughts. 1962 also marked the beginning of an understanding of what are called phantom environmental risks, with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, addressing synthetic pesticides. It was in the 1980s when I first appreciated the existential risk of climate change and biodiversity collapse. It was when I was chairing an environmental law committee of the International Bar Association, an organisation established by the United Nations in 1947. Since then, in my career, I have been heavily involved in addressing national and international law and policy responses to manage these significant ecological risks that do not respect sovereign boundaries. My work involves considerations of axiological theory addressing intrinsic and extrinsic values and how to make value judgments and choices when faced with conflicting and sometimes incommensurate values. It also involves natural law theory, where the authority of the law is derived from a high order of values and moral authority. This is also seen in human rights law. Applied ethics of kaitiaki-tanga and stewardship and intergenerational justice are always relevant considerations when engaged in ecological decision-making. The Resource Management Act is replete with such value-laden imperatives. The subject of existential threats is dominated by the language of risk. There are private risks that we voluntarily choose to accept or not. And there are public risks that are outside our control and are imposed on us. Public risks need aggressive risk management measures to serve the public interest. At a basic level, developing risk management measures involves three discrete steps. First, the identification of a perceived or actual risk. Second, the assessment of the likelihood or probability of the risk of an adverse impact being realised. And third, the management of that risk. An everyday example is when we're about to walk across a road at a point where there is a restricted view. We identify the risk of being struck by an unseen vehicle. We assess the probability or likelihood of having time to cross safely, and we might then manage that risk by moving to a point where there is a less impeded view. We instinctively undertake several risk-benefit evaluations every day. Before the government can develop legislation, in addition to a cost-benefit analysis, a regulatory risk-benefit analysis must be undertaken. Risk management often involves judging whether a risk is ethically acceptable. I now turn to the existential risk of artificial intelligence, AI. This is an alien form of intelligence that we humans are developing. It is the first technology in human history that can make decisions by itself and create new ideas by itself. Of four existential threats, namely a nuclear holocaust, ecological collapse, global pandemics, and technological disruption of AI, currently AI ranks as the most unregulated and least managed existential risk. In recent years, you may have followed with interest the emergence of deep learning and generative AI, the rapid development of foundation models and large language models with neural networks inspired by studying the way the human brain works. You may have used the AI bot ChatGPT, first released by OpenAI in November 2022. A bot is defined as an automated software application that performs tasks over a network. It can also run independently without human intervention. we are becoming aware of the significant benefits of AI in the areas of health, transport, education, and environmental and energy management. However, we have also witnessed the risk of AI influencing election processes with fake videos, and we may have personally experienced cybersecurity risks with AI being used by hackers to steal our private information. We are now learning of the AI arms race with the development of killer robots by military. Universities have been actively establishing interdisciplinary futures centres to address existential risks and ethics. We are now witnessing how rapidly machines are learning and becoming more intelligent. We see this with each new version of ChatGPT. Massive digital data facilities are being built to house these expanding large language models that are resulting in an exponential growth of artificial intelligence. Recently, we have become alerted to the development of artificial general intelligence, ASI, and artificial superintelligence. Artificial general intelligence is when AI will match human intelligence across all areas of knowledge. And artificial superintelligence is when AI will surpass human intelligence and result in what has been called singularity, a term borrowed from physics. In this context, it means the merging of the inorganic, namely AI, with the organic, namely humans. The development of artificial intelligence has been referred to as the intelligence revolution. There is currently no effective framework of international law instruments in place, such as treaties, protocols, and multilateral agreements to manage global AI risks. UNESCO does have some soft instruments that include the recommendation of the ethics of artificial intelligence and also the Global AI Ethics and Governance Observatory that provides a global resource for policymakers, regulators and civil society to find solutions to the pressing challenges of AI. However, these instruments provide guidance rather than an enforceable regulatory regime. In March last year, an open letter was released by the Future of Life Institute. It was signed by academic AI researchers and influential developers of AI. It called for a 6-month pause by labs training bots that would become more powerful than ChatGPT-4. So that time was available to establish governance and safety controls that could be implemented to address these identified AI risks. Shortly afterwards, in May 2023, hundreds of artificial intelligence experts and other notable figures signed the following short statement on AI risk, and I quote, "Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war," unquote. Among the signatories were the two most cited computer scientists, Turing laureates, Canadians Professor Geoffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, and Professor Joshua Bengio. These eminent scientists are extremely concerned about a growing inability to understand how generative AI is reasoning and processing training data, and how these machines will regard humans as they gain autonomy and agency. Last year, Geoffrey Hinton realised that the large language models with their neural networks are already capable of creating and implementing what he calls sub-goals and are exhibiting reasoning processes. Being value-free and eventually with no human input necessary, an AI machine's realisation of a goal is unlikely to be impeded by any concern for humanity. Until now, humans have always retained control over their inventions and determined how and when they should be used. Hinton and his fellow computer scientists opine that soon the inventions themselves will decide. The bomb will make the decision. These fears have led to an outpouring of concern by public intellectuals, such as the historian and philosopher Professor Yuval Harari, raising the philosophical and ethical implications for existing and future generations of humankind. Governments and the United Nations are responding to these warnings by convening meetings with AI developers and academics to assess the risks and advise how to manage and regulate them before the release of further products into the public sphere. In November last year, the UK government convened an international conference at Bexley Park to discuss safety measures and a possible pause with development. In March this year, the European Parliament passed the EU Artificial Intelligence Act to address the risks presented by generative and general-purpose AI. The EU continues to develop a complex regulatory regime to address the development, release and application of AI by member states. Australian AI governance and safety standards are also pending. The real and present danger is that when AI bots become more intelligent than us, it will not be possible for us as a less intelligent species to control these non-human entities. Only by cooperating globally will governments have the power to regulate powerful AI developers and compel them to implement effective safety and risk management measures. However, that is challenging. Last year's open letter and the short statement on AI risk did not lead to a pause in the development of more powerful AI or the imposition of regulatory safety controls. The Bexley Park initiative did not make any progress, with the participants agreeing that strong risk management measures could stifle innovation. The AI technology industry has predictably claimed that for now it should be allowed to self-regulate by developing codes of ethics and guidelines alongside the provision of educational material, informing the public of how the industry is managing risks and working to align AI with human values. They maintain that they can successfully manage the risks without governments imposing legally enforceable regulatory measures. This is a similar approach to that taken historically by big oil, tobacco and asbestos interests, to resist national and international regulatory responses by governments to protect the environment and human health. I addressed environmental law and public risk in my PhD. I concluded that where there is uncertainty, complexity and a lack of reliable information about significant public risks, then safe self-regulatory and voluntary measures, economic instruments and educational initiatives are inadequate and ineffective responses, and that precautionary regulatory national and international law measures are necessary to manage those risks. It is clear that large language models are learning at such a rapid rate that we must be prepared for the emergence of machines with artificial general intelligence in this decade. The pre-release publicity concerning ChatGPT-5 is that it will have intelligence at a PhD level across all knowledge domains. When artificial superintelligence is developed, it will be incomprehensible to us. We will not be able to understand it, let alone control it. Some developers suggest this could happen within 20 years. It has been suggested that artificial superintelligence is equivalent to the discovery of fire and the beginning of language. How then should we respond to the intelligence revolution and the existential threat? As responsible members of civil society, we have actively engaged in addressing the risks to humanity from nuclear arms and from ecological collapse due to climate change and biodiversity loss. We understand that our government needs to utilise the principal social constructs of law, economics and technology to address these risks. However, civil society does not yet seem sufficiently engaged with the implications of the intelligence revolution. Recently, a young expert working in a cybersecurity unit explained to me how concerned he and his generation are about my generation, the so-called gerontocracy, and its seeming lack of interest in AI risks. He also raised the apparent ignorance of many politicians and policy analysts about the extent of these risks. I've been reflecting on how we can become more actively engaged with the philosophical and ethical issues raised by the intelligence revolution. I believe that we can benefit from drawing on the approach taken during the Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th and early 19th centuries to address the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of the modern scientific age. Moral and political philosophers, theologians, philosophers of law and science, poets, writers, lawyers, medical doctors, ministers, engineers and many others addressed the pressing issues at the outset of that revolution and a new age of reason, science and technology. They met in homes, clubs, coffee shops and Masonic lodges. They were well resourced by the excellent Advocates Library in Edinburgh and the scholarly journals that were established to address the challenging social issues. Many of the main participants were Presbyterian and their values were informed by their faith tradition. It was a time of original ideas and inventions, of civil discourse, respectful debate, critical thinking, interdisciplinary approaches, public intellectuals and polymaths. The universities played a critical role in the Scottish Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. I suggest that universities are also bedrock institutions when addressing the current intelligence revolution. When the University of Otago was established in 1869, its founders were greatly influenced by the principles of the Scottish Enlightenment and the example of Scottish universities with their wide-ranging curricula. The founders' goal was to equip bright young graduates to debate and address the important issues for the colony, help develop its public institutions, and serve and promote the public good. And the first student club at Otago was the Debating Society. We must encourage our university to ensure that the issue of existential risks, including AI, is addressed at undergraduate and postgraduate levels, and that interdisciplinary scholarship and research addressing these issues is strengthened. Philosophical and ethical responses to these existential risks must inform the university's role as critic and conscience of society. I was delighted in 2018 when the University of Otago was the first in the country to sign the International SDG Accord of Universities pursuing the UN Sustainable Development Goals 2030. I believe we need to encourage our university to establish a dedicated interdisciplinary sustainable future centre that addresses existential risks and helps inform law and policy development to manage the risks. The university must also enhance its reputation for excellence in the education of its clever young students and the way it equips them as graduates to address risks to humanity that they are very aware of and desperately anxious about. I was very pleased to hear our incoming Vice-Chancellor in his first week in the position say publicly that he considers climate change and AI are critical areas of scholarship and teaching for our university. We must also urge governments to regulate AI developers and enforce safety and precautionary risk management laws nationally and internationally. Precautionary risk management controls usually include safety trials and experiments before a product is released into the market. This is required when developing, for instance, new drugs, aircraft and arms. We also regulate the food industry and the use of dangerous kills. I agree with Dr. Hinton that laws should be promulgated that require AI developers to dedicate at least 1/3 of their development budgets to address safety issues and measures. And before any AI bot is released publicly, undertake empirical experiments and develop and implement enforceable controls that ensure that the AI does not irreversibly harm and eventually replace humankind. This must occur while we are a more intelligent species. This is an urgent risk management matter. It is inevitable that soon we will understand less than AI bots. When there is a crisis, governments are likely to have to rely on the AI to understand what went wrong. For example, we may need to ask the bomb itself which target it intends to destroy. How frightening is that? If we're not careful, that will be our legacy. Even autocratic governments are concerned about artificial general intelligence. They realise that they will not have dominion over AI in the way they can over their human subjects. Some positive news is the recent announcement about a startup company called Safe Superintelligence Inc., SSI. It has been established by Dr. Ilya Sutskever, who was formerly with OpenAI, running its now disestablished safety and alignment program that addressed existential risk. The mission of his company is to align the goals of artificial general intelligence and hopefully artificial superintelligence with value-laden ones of humanity and build in safety protocols and features to ensure that artificial superintelligent bots are pro-social, kind to humans, and care for them as a child should care for a parent. This focus on ethics and safety augurs well for the future. The issue, though, is where ethically is the line that should not be crossed by developers or artificial intelligence. The central question should continue to be addressed in moral philosophy and public theology. For example, some AI developers consider democracy as sacrosanct, and that they will not agree to their AI product being involved in electioneering. So, now after all that despair, and before I turn to what I believe can provide us with hope, under the format of these series, I would be interested in your thoughts.
Well, I think we've been well challenged, and now is the time for questions. So, we've got a microphone. Put your hand up.
Thank you. It's something that you touched on, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts on it. It's the intergenerational problem that I think is enormous. What we're dealing with is wise older heads, such as are in this room, who speak an entirely different language and have a different reality to the people who are developing this material. The people that are developing AI are probably, except for the odd exception, at their oldest in their 40s. a lot of them in their 20s. And these are people who have been brought up on science fiction, fantasy fiction, computer games where there are no consequences, kill as many people as you want, create havoc and there are no consequences, turn around and walk away. They also have no concept of death. I didn't in my 20s, 30s. I had no concept that anything could kill me even in my early 40s. I do now. But I didn't then. And I wonder, are we, as anybody, using the right language with them? And I don't know what that language is. But I don't think they will respond to, I don't know what they'll respond to. I really don't. Because they were brought up on material, fictional material that always ends in Armageddon. Always. It's always cataclysm. It's always the survivors are renegades and they go out to save the world sort of thing. And I think that actually is very enticing for an awful lot of these people. I'm terrified to say. I don't know what your thoughts are. I'd love to know.
Right. Royden will take all the questions and then come back to them. There's nothing.
Royden, thank you very much for the talk. I now know 100% at least more than I did at the start of this talk, and I'm grateful for that. Is there a chance that people who want to put restrictions on the issue of generative AI, in particular super AI, will be seen rather like Luddites wanting to break up machines in factories, and so therefore will be stopping progress? The progress, however, as has been outlined, is not the progress that we would normally think of. This is not progress to make life, I think, better for humanity. It's the progress of simply developing something for its own ends, whatever those ends might be. And if the ends are out there in the ether, that is, super AI is out there doing its own thing, connecting with machines of like, I don't want to use the word mind, but like entities. What chance is there of ordinary humans actually stopping them, or at least stopping them hurting humanity?
I heard another development in relation to AI was that in 5 or 10 years it might be possible to create what's called a digital human equivalent. And this intelligence could represent you at another meeting that you're too busy to go to. I wonder what you think of how this might impact upon preaching in the church, where we could have digital human equivalents with huge theological wisdom, but with zero pastoral skills.
Okay, so I have a question that's probably a little bit more immediate, and that is, do the developers of AI, these models, have a moral imperative to pay those whose work the models are trained on? So as a published author, your work is potentially being used to train these models, and people are deriving benefit from that. Do they then have the moral imperative to compensate you for that? And that gets into, I guess, from my perspective, the broader issue around, just forgetting the name of the term, but like a general wage for people whose work would be displaced by AI. Universal basic income is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, Warren.
One more. Sorry, one more. Sorry, yes.
I just wanted to redress the intergenerational risk again. I mean, in working with young postgraduate students, when ChatGPT came out, of course, everybody wanted to use it. It was mimicking what happened in my research lab when I bought computers for the lab, realised there was some risk, and for about 3 weeks the lights were on 24 hours a day and they were all playing computer games. I thought, my goodness me, I've done absolutely the wrong thing. But of course they learnt the tools. You know, young people they want to use this, but they see a lot of positive benefits from it, and they're focused on the positive benefits, not on the fears that, you know, I have felt, which you so brilliantly espoused there. However, even I now am seeing some major benefits for the application of AIs in clinical work with complex diseases, where if one could pool all of the world's knowledge of doctors treating patients successfully, so a clinician in their office could put in the symptoms of their patient and get an answer back in 30 microseconds that this is the best treatment, this is what they've got, etc. One could see enormous benefits. So it's almost like we have I have two hemispheres. I have one hemisphere that worries about all of the things you talked about, and then I have the other hemisphere that kind of is excited about all of the possibilities. How do we resolve that paradox?
Yes, well, actually you should be giving this lecture, Warren. I was thinking we could have a whole lecture on what protein folding or something. I just need to say that the people the scientists who are raising these concerns about existential risks make 2 points. One, that they are dedicated to the science. They've been working on it all their lives. And people like Hinton have been, he started as a PhD student at Oxford years and years ago, looking at neural networks. So they've raised 2 things. They say the first thing is they're not in any way demeaning the progress in the areas where AI is of immense value. I mean, my doctor was saying he's getting a machine where he can talk to me and the machine will take the notes and the machine will say to him, you weren't very empathetic with that patient, you could have been a bit more caring with the patient. And it might even come up with some diagnosis, although the doctor's not bound by that. Now the other questions, I think I might cover most of them in my last section, and I'll supplement that section and try and answer some of them the best I can. I do need an AI assistant, I think, to answer. So let's see if we can look at this in a different light. Notwithstanding these catastrophic and apocalyptic thoughts about the existential risk of AI, I do believe, and this will be interesting perhaps to explore your point, that we can still be hopeful about the future of humankind. I'm confident about that because of the moral integrity and intellect of some of the very impressive and engaged members of our children and grandchildren's generation. They are stridently advocating for a strong precautionary approach to managing existential risks. We witness with admiration anxious and ethically responsible young people, including school children, grappling with the climate and nature crises, and marching to protest the distressing prevarication and negligence of governments that fail to develop effective laws and policies to mitigate and manage these horrendous threats to human health and well-being. These young people are not fixated on the endless rehearsal of arguments about contemporary issues such as sexuality and the use of tobacco. These issues may rile up members of our generation, but for our children and grandchildren who are thinking about this, they are passé. They have more urgent matters to worry about. I suggest that their and our reality is the unrelentless human assault on the biosphere and the explosive growth of unregulated AI, and the constant chipping away of emancipatory forms of participatory and liberal democratic government. The historian and philosopher Harari, the author of Sapiens and Homo Deus and 21 Questions for the 21st Century, opines that the best way to equip our young people to confront an uncertain and complex future is to help them develop not only their intelligence, intellectual intelligence or IQ, but also their emotional intelligence or EQ and their adaptability and resilience. We need to ensure that AI can also assist with this. And an example is the AI bot called PI, developed by the new CEO of Microsoft AI, Mustafa Suleyman, who studied philosophy and theology at university. This bot will engage with you in a conversation about any issue that might be worrying you. It will respond with kindness and empathy and will not be judgmental, even if you're very angry and outspoken about a polarising cultural and social issue. It will provide you with helpful information. It will not engage if you wish to discuss harmful ideas or actions. It must be accepted that our children and grandchildren are better equipped than us to address AI. For them, AI is not necessarily a mysterious entity. The renowned computer scientist, Professor Fifi Lee, the co-director of the Stanford Institute of Human-Centered Research, is very optimistic about the future of AI and its alignment with human values and needs. And that is because of the deep ethical concerns of the clever young engineers working in her lab. She claims that they are typical representatives of their generation. So we're talking about a very select group here in terms of your point. I believe we not only have a duty to participate in events such as this gathering, to discuss how we will confront these 21st century challenges, but we also have a moral duty to support and inspire these future servant leaders who will need to be very emotionally intelligent and have the resilience to combat and adaptively manage these horrific risks. We must help provide them with a moral compass that they can consult during a time of uncertainty, complexity and constant change. We must applaud them and encourage them as they assiduously work for human well-being and justice. That, I believe, is the least we can do. On a personal note, I experienced great hope when a grandchild reported that she had elected as her optional subjects in Year 9, or in our language, the third form, philosophy, earth sciences and poetry. One of my sub-goals is that whenever I can, to attempt ever so gently to persuade our grandchildren and their friends to come to New Zealand's first university for their higher education, and to assure them that to do so will help equip them to confront the challenges of the future and to dare to be wise. Now, in conclusion, and this is picking up a little bit on one of the earlier questions, I contend that if singularity is conceivable, and we humans as a biological species will ultimately merge cognitively and physically with AI and humanoid robots, we need to begin an urgent conversation about what it means to be human. Perhaps we should be courageous and try to envisage the unimaginable and promote a human-inspired, value-laden foundation for a future involving a new hybrid life form that we would understand as a biotechnological being. The future is unknown and we are fearful, but we must continue to strive as a human species to flourish and to hope. Now, the questions. If I may talk about preaching in AI. I do two things. There is a philosopher of theology. I think she's called I'm not sure. Is a professor of philosophical theology, I think. Judith Wolfe at St Andrews University of St Andrews, who has a project at the moment called it's called Widening Visions. I think I've just got a note of it somewhere. And that is Judith comes from eschatology. It's sort of an ending background dealing with eschatology. It's called Widening Horizons and the Search for Meaning. And her group is looking at contemporary issues like climate change, and it's a collaboration between theologians and philosophers of the European tradition, European Western philosophy. Two things are coming out of that. One is the super AI could develop its own story. If you look at Christianity or anything else as a story, it can develop its own. It's hoovering up on the World Wide Web and everything, so much information, and as somebody said, it's connecting with all the other machines, and it's instantaneous, so it's not going to be necessarily bound by a human story or our theology. So I believe that the way through this for the churches is through not only dealing with the escat or endings, but through public theology. I think the churches need to be in the public space in the way they are with social justice. This church here, not church, other churches. Social justice, we're now dealing with probably the greatest issue of justice. Climate is actually, one can see a solution there, and that is to stop the use of carbon. And it's totally, I think it's artificial to say we'll just pump it all into the ground so we can keep using thermal power stations and so forth. There's got to be some hard decisions made. But they're not within, we don't have to make those decisions by 2020, 30. We can talk about policy and net carbon issues, but we can't deal with the whole thing like we may have to with this AI. The second thing with AI, there are two ways of dealing with it that would perhaps we can understand as humans. The first thing is, when it gets to a point, and it's probably the general artificial intelligence, when it gets close to the point where we might lose control of it, it's at that point you need a crisis. It's like everything else. You need a crisis to do something that is something that's courageous and is ethical. And that crisis would probably be to do an experiment as to what that point might lead to. But it's got to be close to the point of horror for that to happen. That's my personal view. I think it's because when you talk about value-laden foundations and so forth, whose values? It's really whose values will provide the exemplar? It's very difficult. Yeah, so to answer your question, Pat, I believe we're going to have to work on that. I understand that dystopia is that sort of literature is all over the place and so forth. But I think we have to work on educating that generation for the sake of our species, basically. On terms of the issues, I think I may have answered that, but I did, and I think I've answered the theological one. There was another question. Did I have answer? Sorry, answer. I'm tempted to think about it. Warren's on. Okay. So, Rob, I know we'll all need to go down home and have a lie down and probably a whiskey, but I'd just like to encourage you to stay engaged with this subject. And also, New Zealand has been a standout country when it comes to existential risks like nuclear, climate, we were doing so well, although we slipped on that. Biodiversity, we're part of, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I have met a colleague who's Herman Hauser, who's a German, but he was at Cambridge, he's now an entrepreneur, venture capitalist. He's the only venture capitalist in the UK that's got a Royal Society Fellowship. His view is that we're going to have to look for goals that may not appear to be influenced by values. Goals that are commonly accepted, and he is talking about training AI to head for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because everyone signed up for those, every country, the United Nations. So a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope I would find a common expression of wanting to really support this person. We've heard something quite significant tonight and challenge, and that we're going to need people like Royden and in significant places to push forward any legal requirements, and he's ideally suited to be able to do some of that. But I hope that we will support people like Royden and those who are challenging us in terms of the AI and ethical issues. And I think as a church, we have been challenged tonight to think about moral stance and what might be supportive of AI's future and its use. I enjoy it. But I can see some of the challenges as well. So thank you, Royden, and all the very best. Royden, George wants.
I'd like to say it's been entertaining, but it's far too serious a topic to be entertained on. However, it does bring to mind the fact that we were discussing in a committee of four something in our last meeting, which was about how can the Methodist Church get back into that public questions committee it used to be prevalent in between the 1930s and the 1950s. It seems since that time the Methodist Church has done a bit of a walk away into other things. But there is time, with guidance of people like Royden, to pick up the challenge again and look more seriously at what is happening to humanity. And I believe that's the destiny of this church. I know there are a number of you who don't come to this church, but that's fine. You should know where we're going.